Yeah. May I ask the media to clear the front stage? Please clear the front stage. We need to get started. Media, please clear the front stage. Thank you. Please clear the front stage. Thank you.
Breaking up with the past and moving towards a common future sometimes comes at a cost. 150,000 dead, 4 million displaced. Ukraine. Similar, but no. These were the tolls that this region has paid in a decade-long war. Are the conflicts over? Are they frozen, or are they overcome? We would like to believe so. However, as we can see from the ongoing Russian aggression of Ukraine that began in 2014 and escalated with an invasion this year, regions that are not fully integrated into the global democratic system are prone to destabilization and turning into a burning conflict zone. So far, the invasion has resulted in an estimated 7.1 million refugees, 8 million internally displaced, 25,000 civilian deaths, among them 225 children. Sadly, Western Balkans has experienced a lot of perils and conflicts. Yet, facing the challenges and threats, the region has become more resilient and has learned to convert the words and actions that tear us apart into connections and cooperation. Alone, we can do so little. However, through continued strengthening of the regional cooperation, as well as by upholding the strategic partnership, we can actively contribute to the overall European security architecture. Let us once again unite, open a dialogue, and build a bridge to a common future. Prespa Forum Dialogue.
Are we waiting? Ladies, gentlemen, your excellencies, a very good evening and warm welcome in this spectacular location, full of beauty, full of history, on the banks of the Ohrid Lakes, where tonight we kickstart the second edition of the Prespa Forum Dialogue. As you know, the Forum is an initiative of the government of the Republic of North Macedonia, and it aims to provide a platform for countries, for leaders, for organizations and citizens in Europe and beyond to discuss common problems and to find common solutions for a better, safer, and joint future. The inaugural Prespa Forum in July 2021 was held at a time when the world was still dealing with the worst pandemic of the last century, the COVID-19 crisis, of course. But also at a time when EU enlargement towards the Balkans seemed stuck in a rut, despite having important breakthroughs in the region, like the Skopje-Athens agreement on a solution to the name dispute, but also despite agreeing on a new methodology for accession negotiations. We thought that things were quite difficult and very complicated back then. But 24 February this year came about, and of course we were proven wrong. Because as you know, on that day Russia invaded Ukraine, bringing war back on the EU's borders and effectively causing the greatest upheaval to EU's security architecture since the end of the Second World War. Russia's military aggression in Ukraine has been heralded as a historic watershed moment for Europe, including EU's foreign policy, where, of course, enlargement is the crown jewel. While change is the operational word at present, the precise direction of that change, however, remains veiled in uncertainty. The war has spurred new membership applications, as you know, from Ukraine, Georgia, and the Republic of Moldova, and has also strengthened the geopolitical argument in favor of EU enlargement to the Balkans, not least as a means of fending off Russian influences in the region. But political decisions are yet to transpire. And so, for now, the enlargement dossier continues to lack dynamism. This means that the logic of the Prespa Forum dialogue to provide space for constructive and creative thinking and interaction that could lead to courageous and to common solutions to our complex and common problems remains very much valid, arguably more so today than ever before. So I very much look forward to the exchanges of this year's Prespa Forum, and also I am eager to hear from our distinguished speakers at this opening session how they can help us frame the conversation also for tomorrow. So without further ado, let's dive straight into the discussion, and I would like to invite first His Excellency President Stevo Pendarovsky to reflect on this new era, or Zeitenwende, as it has been called, and to tell us what are the most important implications of the war in Ukraine that you would like this year's forum to focus on.
It's up to me. Thank you, Corina. I will try to squeeze all of your questions and the general topic of the conference, plus the topic for this particular session, into 5 minutes. If I am overstepping the time, please forgive me, since I am the host. Am I clear? The topic of the conference is Europe's new security architecture. And the topic of this session is what after the war in Ukraine. So let's merge into one. It seems to me that the new security architecture for Europe is not necessary. What do we need is only to strengthen the existing one. Everybody knows that decades ago there was a thesis coming from some of the European capitals that it's possible to build a pan-European security architecture will be stretched from the Ural to the Atlantic. It seems to me that that was not feasible and realistic even at that time, not to speak today. After the Russian invasion in Ukraine, that is absolutely impossible. Just to use the title of one of your latest reports as European Policy Center, speaking about the European democratic frontier, in my view, it's maybe harsh to say, but in my view, it's not possible to have Russia within that democratic frontier of Europe. As simple as that. With and without the war in Ukraine. With the war in Ukraine, even more. The key question is, for many of us, what after the war in Ukraine? The response of the European Union and the United States of America was unprecedented. The level of unity, the level of cohesion we have shown in approaching this war was unprecedented. As far as I remember, only during the first Gulf War in 1991, we have seen that level of cohesion, solidarity, and common approach between both shores of the Atlantic. Not after that. But I'm afraid to say, what after the war is over, I wouldn't like to see anybody from Europe or from the United States of America, the crucial parts of the Western Alliance, to go the so-called business as usual. Speaking about the business as usual, I have one parameter in mind. After the annexation of Crimea in 2014, virtually everybody from Europe goes back for quite a short period of time to the business as usual. Not speaking about the trade or economic exchanges, about energy connectivity. So Russians at that time and after that have not felt any consequences for grabbing the part of one sovereign country. Unfinished project of the European integrations. Just for everybody to be reminded. We are waiting with the status of a candidate country for the membership for 17 years, and unfortunately chasing the very unpopular record of Turkey, which is for decades with that formal status. It seems to me that the unfinished project of United Europe has some security consequences for the Western Balkans and for those countries who would like to be the candidate in one point in the future. And I'm seeing that direct connection between the unfinished project of United Europe and security architecture, the old one of Europe. How it is possible? First of all, Russia is undermining our societies for years. Speaking specifically about North Macedonia, we have felt that consequences of the hybrid threats, political propaganda, fake news, especially since 2018, since our referendum on the name change. I am guessing now, but I have enough of the parameters to say that after the war in Ukraine is over, Russia will be back to that business as usual. Again, going against the democracies on the West, with fake news, with political propaganda, saying that we should not chase that membership in the European Union, or that the membership into the NATO alliance is not so worth to be pursued. Do not forget that we are only one of the several countries in the region which has expelled dozens of Russian diplomats, which has been acting as a classic spies under the guise of diplomats, only in the past 12 months. Half of them has been expelled from our country well before the war in Ukraine started. So what if we in Europe started to behave like nothing happened after the war is over in Ukraine? That's my biggest worry at the moment. Speaking and asking the questions whether the war in Ukraine is helping our integration process or demands of some other countries, you have mentioned 3 of them, the newest candidates for the European Union membership, or is not. You know, it's really pity to say that the war anybody in the world can be beneficial for your political aspirations. I wouldn't like to see the war in Ukraine as being beneficial for my country, be it for membership in the European Union. If that is really the case, because many of us are speaking more and more about geopolitical aspects of the European integrations, if that is really the truth, if we are confirming, saying yes, there is the connection between them, that means only one thing, that the European integration project has structural weaknesses. If we are waiting for that kind of war to happen on the European soil, to say, that's good now, more of us should be at least reconsidered for entering the European Union, that's bad for the very project, for the very idea of united Europe. What's happening with the European integration project, which has a clear security aspect even well before the war in Ukraine? That enlargement, that policy once being considered as the most important, the most successful of the European Union, is completely frozen. Not in a formal sense, but practically it is frozen. Why it is that? Because European Union member states are preaching, are saying and discussing for years that they would, first of all, like to deepen the union, to change the procedure within the union, and even after that, to speak about enlarging the union. Or in the best case scenario, these two processes to go in parallel. What's happening on the first plan? What's happening with the deepening of the union? Nothing. I cannot invoke any single decision by the European Union bettering the procedures within the organization, which can help, or when accepting many more members to come in the European Union. So, since the deepening is frozen, the enlargement is frozen as well. In the Western Balkans, while waiting for that European Union project to be completed, we are facing a demographic catastrophe. We have seen the results of our latest census. We are seeing, everybody is witnessing the censuses throughout the Western Balkan region. Western Balkan as a region on paper has 18 million people. In reality, it has no more than 13 to 14 million at the most. So the region is emptying. The best and brightest among us are leaving the country, waiting to become the part of that organization, which is somehow guaranteed the prospects for the chances for prospering in the future. And waiting for that, our population has halved in the meantime. Last but not the least, in this very specific moment, but not only North Macedonia, but Albania is blocked. Montenegro and Serbia are negotiating for a decade, for a whole decade, without seeing any significant progress. Then we are hearing, we are witnessing the emerging of kind of a new idea about the new European political community. I have spoken today and yesterday with Mr. Charles Michel, with a few of our European colleagues, asked them for clarifying the very content of that term. What does that mean? Is going to be a Europe with 1 or 2 speeds, whatever? Is then going to be a waiting room for those countries which never will become the members of the Union? And what about the already members with the candidate status? What about the Georgia, Ukraine, and Moldova? So it has been explained to me that it's going to be kind of a political forum for consultations. But we have to say that to our people. Otherwise, European support for the European Union membership is falling sharply, drastically. I can tell you the polling only for our population in North Macedonia, in the last 18 months, support for EU membership dropped by 25%, and blockade by Bulgaria towards us is not the only culprit in this regard. So it seems to me that we should face each other directly into our eyes, speak directly and say, this is our final plan for you. I mean, Brussels should step out and say, we have really serious intentions towards integrating the Western Balkan region into the European infrastructure. Security, political, economic, trade, whatever you want. Otherwise, more and more people will be skeptical about the European project, and I can tell you that autocratic regimes, autocratic tendencies are more and more visible in the region, and the alternative to us are, without any single exception, an autocratic movements. I wouldn't like to say outright dictatorial, but autocratic movements and persons which has nothing to do with the idea of the United Europe. All of them, without any single exceptions, are anti-European and anti-Western. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. I would now like to turn to a very special point on the agenda of this session, which concerns a video recording that features none other than His Excellency President Volodymyr Zelensky, contributing his own thoughts to the debate here and telling us what, in his opinion, is at stake for Europe in this war that his country has been fighting so bravely for the past few months. Have a listen.
Шановний пане президенте Бондаровський, шановні президенти, прем'єр-міністри, парламентарі, шановні присутні, друзі, я вдячний можливості звернутися до вас і залишити свої аргументи до дискусії на вашому важливому форумі. Зараз для Європи і європейської безпеки історичний момент, коли усім належить визначитись, що таке Європа і якою бути надалі Європа. Чи такою ж вільною, як зараз, чи такою ж безпечною, до якої звикла більшість європейців, чи такою ж розвинутою соціально, економічно, яка може надихати суспільство поза межами Європи на зміни життєвого устрою. Росія кинула виклик нам усім, кожному народу на континенті, кожному регіону Європи. Для України це найстрашніший виклик – воєнний. І ми захищаємо вже 113-й день проти амбіцій Росії знищити український народ і нашу культуру. Зруйновані російською армією українські міста, мільйони переселенців, сотні тисяч людей, які були депортовані російськими військовими, і десятки тисяч убитих українців. І все це максимальний прояв російської антиєвропейської політики. Розпочавши цю війну проти України, Росія намагалася створити плацдарм для наступу на інші народи Європи. І тому наш захист у цій війні і майбутня перемога принципово важливі для безпеки усіх в Європі. Але окрім цього, максимального прояву російської антиєвропейської політики є ще багато інших її проявів. Менш масштабних, однак все одно дуже підлих і деструктивних, відверто агресивних. Я хочу звернути увагу на те, що на сьогодні в Європі не залишилось жодної країни, яка би не постраждала хоча б від одного з багатьох проявів російської антиєвропейської політики. Пані та панове, всі ми у демократичному світі зіткнулися з небаченою енергетичною кризою. Багато років Росія створювала враження, що нібито є надійним постачальником енергоресурсів. Але насправді їй вдалося зробити залежними від себе різні країни Європи. І тепер, коли Росія вирішила воювати для підкорення європейських народів, вона використала цей енергетичний ланцюг першим. Спеціально спровокувала історично надвисокі ціни на газ. Спеціально обмежує постачання газу, шантажуючи і окремі країни, і Європу в цілому. Порушує чинні контракти, вимагає оплату за газ в рублях і штучно обмежує обсяг постачання. Цей тиск на газовий ринок, а також використання інших інструментів Росією призводить до того, що інфляційні процеси значно прискорились. Цього просто не було би, якби Росія поводила себе як відповідальний постачальник, а не хотіла створити кризу. Ще й гірший сценарій реалізується на продовольчому ринку. Там провокується не лише зростання цін, причому на базові продукти харчування, але й нова міграційна криза. Російська блокада українських портів і удари по нашій агропромисловій інфраструктурі призводять до утворення дефіциту на важливих регіональних сегментах світового ринку продовольства. Українська пшениця, кукурудза, соняшникова олія та інші товари були незамінними для глобальної продовольчої стабільності. Росія знала, куди бити, щоб створити цю кризу. І вона свідомо її посилює, коли затягує війну проти нашої держави і відмовляється зробити Чорне море безпечним для судноплавства. Для чого вона це робить? Щоб, зокрема, і по вашим країнам, а також по вашим сусідам в Європі вдарила нова міграційна хвиля. Скільки мільйонів біженців буде в Європі, якщо через російську політику почнеться голод в африканських та азіатських країнах? А якщо нестача продуктів там і цінова криза спровокують політичний хаос і падіння урядів? Чи зможете ви тоді проводити консолідовану політику? Ось для чого Росії продовольча криза. І я згадую ще один елемент російської антиєвропейської політики. Росія чи не найбільше в світі вкладається у пропаганду. І не тільки для внутрішньої аудиторії, щоб обманювати зовнішню аудиторію і щоб розпалювати ворожнечу. Росія витрачає мільярди доларів щорічно. І зв'язок пропаганди та війни, він очевидний. У перші місяці цього року російський бюджет на пропаганду був збільшений втричі. Я впевнений, що кожен і кожна з вас знають, які засоби пропаганди працювали чи досі працюють проти ваших держав. І у цього інструменту Росії лише одне завдання – робити гірше. Зокрема, робити і вам гірше. Пані та панове, ось чому будь-яке серйозне обговорення архітектури безпеки в Європі має базуватись на тому, що треба звільнити Європу від ланцюгів залежності, які російська держава створювала протягом десятиліть. Безпека просто неможлива без цього. Причому це однаково і для півночі Європи, і для півдня, і для Заходу, і для Сходу. Ось чому потрібні такі санкції проти Росії за антиєвропейську політику, щоб там назавжди запам'ятали ціну, зокрема і за продовольчу кризу. Той, хто створює штучний голод, повинен стати глобальним ізгоєм і понести болісні збитки. Це має бути враховано при підготовці 7-го санкційного пакету Європейського Союзу. І маємо усвідомлювати, що санкційні пакети насправді стали частиною архітектури безпеки на континенті. Вони працюють заради стабільності і миру, обмежують російську здатність до розширення агресії. Потрібна повна енергетична незалежність Європи. Потрібно розірвати будь-які зв'язки з Росією, які вона використовує, щоб заробляти на Європі і одночасно здійснювати антиєвропейську політику. Не може бути жодної торгівлі з Росією, не варто давати гроші тому, хто прагне вашого ж знищення. А головне, потрібно зробити всю Європу нарешті єдиною. Це те, в чому зацікавлення однакове і Україна, і ваші держави Західних Балкан. Повноправна європейська інтеграція України, як і повноправна європейська інтеграція ваших держав – це історичне посилення Європи і повний демонтаж російської можливості бити нас поодинці. Найближчим часом відбудеться саміт високого рівня ЄС Західні Балкани. Щиро бажаю, щоб він став успішним для ваших держав. І я вдячний вам за ту підтримку України, яку ви надаєте на різних рівнях, щоб для нашої держави цей червень став успішним у відносинах з ЄС. Відповідаючи нам щодо нашої європейської перспективи і відповідаючи вам щодо вашої європейської перспективи, народи Європи і європейські політики відповідають на запитання щодо майбутнього Європи. Це саме ті запитання, які я озвучив на початку свого звернення. Якою бути надалі Європі? Чи такою ж вільною, як зараз, чи такою ж безпечною, до якої звикла більшість європейців, чи такою ж розвинутою соціально і економічно, яка може надихати суспільства поза межами Європи на зміни життєвого устрою. Потрібна позитивна відповідь на нашу і вашу європейську перспективу. Я вдячний вам за те, що ми працюємо на таку відповідь і працюємо спільно. Бажаю усім нам успіхів, бажаю усім нам перемоги. Слава Україні!
Very inspiring words, remarks from His Excellency President Zelensky. On a day when Germany's Olaf Scholz, together with France's Emmanuel Macron, Italy's Mario Draghi, and of course Romania's Klaus Iohannis, went on what has been labeled as a historic visit to Kiev. We will see in the end how much of a turning point this visit will prove with regards to EU's relationship with its eastern neighbors. Another open question, of course, remains whether EU leaders will follow President Zelensky's advice, echoed also by President Penderecki, and unite the whole of Europe with the eastern countries and the Balkan countries as a way to counteract Russia's ambition. That is the question. And on that note, I would like to move to His Excellency President Zoran Milanovic and ask him how he assesses the impact of the war on the EU, but also, of course, on EU enlargement policy.
Ladies and gentlemen, Excellencies, Stevo, my dear host, thank you for the invitation. It's not my first time here, hopefully not the last one. So I guess 5 minutes will do, they should do. Well, it doesn't bode well for the European Union. And I will concentrate in these 5 minutes solely, and primarily and solely, on the perspectives of these countries that we refer to as the Western Balkans, namely Bosnia, Macedonia, North Macedonia, Albania, Kosovo, and Serbia, of course. None of these should be dropped. Why I'm telling this? Because some good 2 months ago, there was a NATO summit in Brussels, extraordinary one. And as a good bottom feeder, there is a plus in being bottom feeder. I was in the line for speaking at a place 25 out of 30. So you can listen to the others and add, subtract, hear what I said and what I omitted. So there a kind of phrase developed along the way. Eastern flank countries exposed to the malign Russian influence, and then we went Bosnia, Georgia, and Moldova. So I came to 25th, and I was the first one to utter, just to mention 2 countries, Serbia and Kosovo. which we know very well do not recognize each other, but are part of the Western Balkans. So that is the crucible where all this will be decided. One has to recognize the other. Otherwise, there is no moving forward. And when we refer to Brussels, there is no such thing as Brussels in bringing decisions of this magnitude. So it's Germany, it's France, it's Nordic countries, the others, Croatia being involved, Slovenia for that matter as well. President Pahor has some very valuable initiatives. It's not that we don't care, actually we would give them status as of this morning. So we know who stands against this in Europe. And I'm not here to blame them, but we do not stand in the way. Brussels bureaucracy does not stand in the way. Slovenia does not stand in the way. Bulgaria, I guess, shouldn't be standing in the way, or will not be standing in the way. So it's certain countries. The chairman or the head of government of one of those countries visited Belgrade the other day, Olaf Scholz. And at the very press conference, actually, he launched the condition, namely that Serbia should recognize Kosovo to make life easier. Now, it didn't sit well. Well, actually, you shouldn't clap because this is not exactly how the story unfolded to merit applause. And naturally, expectedly, President Vučić, because that is his paycheck, we all got our paychecks, not to be forgotten. So I have my paychecks and my limits. The things I should say, the things I should go over. Vučić went like, well, but this was never on the table in the first place. This was never conditioned this way. Why are you bringing this up at this point, and this delicate point? And Scholz said, well, I'm just being honest with you. It will not fly prior to the recognition. Now, all this is not very encouraging because I cannot, with the best of disposition, simply conceive Serbia for plethora of political reasons. Social, psychological, historical, resorting to the recognition of Kosovo. Before that is not done, that simple formality for some, by the way, 4 of the NATO members have not recognized Kosovo either, so what are we talking about? The issue will not be settled. And to start bringing this to a close, because my 5 minutes will expire, and I was that serious about 5 minutes. Western Balkans is just a trickle in the waterfall of European economy, social movements, everything, just everything. Its aggregate GDP in nominal prices does not exceed $150 billion in the neighborhood. Population is less than 15 million, so count that the best and the brightest will be immediately subtracted by the average labor market of the Western Europe. The best go first. So those people will be lost for the benefit of the West and the richer countries. There is no any economic reason whatsoever that stops or prevents or should be preventing the richest EU members from admitting these countries in our company. They do not threaten economically. They would adapt one way or the other. It's security, security, security. It's all basic and bare politics. It's mutual recognitions. So that's something that we should solely concentrate on and convey message to Serbia. I don't know whether Serbia is being represented by anybody in the first place at this gathering, because it maybe wouldn't be so fair on my part to make a roll call, to lecture them. But they have to make their pick, choice. Every choice is legitimate. I mean, there are just 2, in or out. If you want to play by the rules, which are not always brilliant, which are frustrating from time to time, ineffective, protractive, a lot of talk, a lot of blow-eating sometimes, then Serbia should play by the rules. And those rules are being adopted and implemented, not at everybody's pleasure, as I said. So the crucible will be Central Western Balkans, or Eastern. Well, what is actually Central? Serbia and Kosovo. Between all other problems are solvable, can be lived with, can be resolved one way or the other. Croatia and Slovenia also had misunderstandings. We had misunderstandings of our own. And when I'm putting that and labeling that as a misunderstanding, I'm doing a service to diplomatic vocabulary. It was more, but we lived with that. These two countries, and anybody who wishes well should not be sparing effort for these things come to pass. And this is finally, and I'm bringing this to a close, a pledge to the countries of the highest standards, our partners and allies within the EU, because it's an alliance of sorts at the same time. There are security provisions in the Lisbon Treaty. To lower their standards a bit, not to signal virtues permanently, because they found themselves in the dire straits these days, trying to apply to NATO, some of them. So they should think better, and they should think that these countries shouldn't be procrastinated for another 20 years. Otherwise, we may continue meeting in this format or formats of this sort and continue discussing, but nothing will change. So that's it. That was my point. Thank you.
If I may follow up with a little question, though, because you mentioned the EU leaders and the importance of the member states in the enlargement policy and in the enlargement process. We learned, for example, today that as a result of the visit that I mentioned earlier of the 4 leaders in Kiev, these 4 countries, including France and Germany, key players in the EU, are throwing their support behind the candidate status for Ukraine and the Republic of Moldova. And I wanted to ask, what do you think that extending the European perspective to the eastern countries will mean for the Balkans? Will it help their cause or complicate things even more?
I certainly see that helping the cause of Bosnia and Herzegovina, the country with which Croatia shares 1,005 kilometers border. Nobody mentions Bosnia. What about Bosnia? I mean, you asked the question. I refrained from mentioning that in this context. But Ukraine getting status of a candidate, fine. I mean, we know that that status is not a panacea. You can get frozen in that status for 20 years, like Macedonia, for instance. But it's a step forward. But what about Bosnia? Is it a dangerous country? Is the country loaded with arms? Is there a potential for a genuine hot armed conflict? None. The answer is negative. So what stops us, or anybody for that matter, in extending that invitation to the countries that are, don't get me wrong, much lesser menace? Because Ukraine is a menace, but it's worth risking. Okay? Bosnia, there are no arms in Bosnia. So this policy of procrastination is killing everybody in Bosnia. Croats, and I'm a statesman of a nation state, it's Croatia. It's a nation state. I know it's obsolete and it's outdated, it's medieval, but it's a nation state. So we care much about that. So thank you for this question. This is kind of, tutoring and replying, thank you for the question. I hate that, but thank you for this question.
Thank you for answering it. And in fact, this brings me, and I will turn now to His Excellency President Borut Pahor, because of course enlargement depends on political will, and it relies a lot on political decisions. But at the same time, we have a process that has been set in place, that has become increasingly complex, that is very technical. And what I wonder is, to what extent is the current method and the current process helping us to resolve issues and sensitive issues like the ones that we've heard about? Bilateral problems, statehood issues. What are the limits and opportunities behind the current toolkit? And do we maybe need to look again and change the approach to the policy? Yes, please.
Thank you, ma'am, colleagues and friends, ladies and gentlemen. Let me start by informing this conference that this very day, today, I did send a formal letter to Council President Charles Michel. The essence of this formal letter is to invite the Council, when debating the enlargement with Ukraine and Moldova, to extend this debate with Bosnia and Herzegovina. I do suggest in my letter to the Council, that, in my opinion, would be a good idea to think a little bit out of the box. And as far as Bosnia and Herzegovina is, debated, I suggest in my letter to grant a status of candidate with no delay, without any formal condition whatsoever. So this is something new. Until now, you know, the enlargement process always has started with some conditions, and with implementing these conditions, okay, the Commission and then the Council have give the green light for the country. The problem with Bosnia, which is one of the very important Western Balkan countries, that for years now is going around with no results, domestically with no basic reforms, in Brussels with no political will to do something. That is why I've, even before the war in Ukraine, back in Munich Security Conference, addressed this issue by saying that there is a strong need for a fast track as far as Bosnia and Herzegovina is concerned, before the war in Ukraine. After the war, when leaders, we have started to debate, this idea of giving the candidate status to Ukraine and possibly to Moldova, and I do support this very strongly. With President Duda, I've been among those presidents who have signed the official letter to Council President. Now I've pulled this decision to write down this formal letter to invite the Council to think also about Bosnia and Herzegovina. Now, Bosnia is not the only problem we are facing as far as the enlargement process is concerned to the Western Balkans. I've also mentioned in my letter Kosovo and North Macedonia, and normally the dialogue between Pristina and Belgrade and all that stuff. But in my view, let me finish by saying, in my view, at this very moment, when the Council in a couple of days will debate the status of candidate country for Ukraine and possibly to Moldova, and I do strongly support this decision, I would like leaders also to debate Bosnia and Herzegovina. And the only thing they could do at this very moment, when Bosnia is not implementing those 14 conditions to get the status, is to forget about the conditions at this very moment, to grant the status, to send a strong signal to Bosnia. Okay, you are maybe a little bit slower than we wanted, but we are not, postpone the decision anymore. This is a geopolitical issue. This is a geopolitical issue. We would like to do something with your country. Please, would you work with us after we would grant you a status of the candidate country, and we will work with you that something will go on. I think, let me finish by saying this, with this, I think, would be sent a message not just to Bosnia, but also to every country in Western Balkans, that something is happening back in Brussels, that there is a strong political will to do something. I think this is the right approach. I am firmly behind this, and I would like to thank many of my colleagues around the 27 countries that are supporting it. Thank you so very much.
Thank you. Thank you for that. But if I can press you just a bit further, do you think that if if we were to grant Ukraine and the Republic of Moldova, as well as you suggest, Bosnia, candidate status, would it suffice to properly, to be able to say that we tapped into this geopolitical moment? Will it suffice, or do we need new tactics? Do we need a new vision? Because ultimately, what is in a name? What is in the candidate status? We've heard earlier that North Macedonia has had it for 17 years. So what?
Well, listen, ma'am. At this very moment, the alternative to do that is to do nothing. So I do think that it's better to do this, a maybe small but very important step, to show the political will back in Brussels that we would like to change something. As far as the enlargement process is concerned, all here, me and my colleagues are debating this for years within the framework of Brdo Briuni. Back in 2016, I think in Sarajevo, we came to the conclusion that enlargement process is geopolitical issue. So we invited Brussels to think to move from technical process, as far as enlargement process is concerned, to political process. So to think a little bit out of the box, when every procedure is so technically, strong and important, and to be a little bit more, flexible. Number two, we invited those countries who would be in favor of NATO to join us. And I would like to thank NATO to enlarge to North Macedonia, Albania, and to Montenegro. And I would like to see also Bosnia, if they would decide it so, and one day also Kosovo to be there. If we would have, the process of enlargement, strong and credible in Western Balkans, if we would see more countries to join NATO, I think there will be a perspective of peace, security, and welfare for the kids for whom we are responsible.
Thank you so much. Now, we spoke about Serbia, we spoke about Bosnia and Herzegovina, so let's talk a bit about Kosovo as well, and for that reason I come to Her Excellency President Vjosa Osmani-Sadriou, and I would like to ask her how you view these current developments, and how would you perceive a potential decision now on granting candidate status to these eastern countries, but also potentially, as we've heard, to Bosnia and Herzegovina.
Thank you very much. I think this mic sounds a little better, so I'm going to use this one. It's a pleasure to join you all, and I think it's only fitting after hearing President Milanovic and President Pahor that I start with a thank you message, and of course President Pendarovski, but a thank you message because the rest of us that are not yet within the European Union are really blessed to have friends like you, President Milanovic and President Pahor. We are really blessed to have you there to speak for us, to fight for us, and to convince the rest of the members of the European Union that we deserve to be there. We deserve to be there because, not just because we are Europeans, not just because we share the same values, but because we are also there up for the challenge, up for the reforms. Secondly, when it comes to the prospects of Ukraine as well as Georgia and Moldova getting the candidate status, obviously Kosovo believes that granting the candidate status to these countries, as it was said before, is a geopolitical decision of a great importance that sends an important message to everyone in Europe and beyond, that we stand with the values on which the European Union was founded, and therefore having Ukraine, Georgia, and Moldova there is also an added value for the European Union, apart from being an extremely important message for those countries that have chosen the right path, because right now, it should be clear for every one of us, and we keep saying it in every single forum, that the path to Moscow and the path to the EU do not cross. They should not cross. They have never been more apart from one another than now. And no one can walk on both paths at once. And that's the least that the EU should expect of us. So those of us that have chosen the right path, not just through statements and speeches, but we're also walking the talk, should get a clear perspective, a clear message, but most importantly, clear action and clear decisions from the European Union. And I believe the June summit is a great opportunity from that. So a positive message towards these countries. I think it's also a positive message for the rest of us that also a decision on the Western Balkans is a geopolitical necessity and a geostrategic decision that the European Union needs to take. Obviously, there's a lot of frustration in the region because a lot of waiting has been happening. And just imagine, Kosovo has been waiting for almost 5 years since the European Commission decided to support visa liberalization for the country. Thousands of our youth, brilliant youth, they missed their orientation day, their graduation day, their PhD defense day, because they can't get a visa appointment. It is as absurd as that. This is a great injustice towards the people of Kosovo, which should end. And of course, I want to once again call upon all the member states of the European Union to make this very easy decision. This is not a tough decision to make. It's a very easy decision because we have fulfilled all of the criteria and because there's absolutely no reason to keep the people of Kosovo in a ghetto. And secondly, when it comes to the candidate status, obviously, of Bosnia-Herzegovina, which we hope Kosovo will also get soon since we are planning to apply for this year, we believe that the time was yesterday, but we really do hope that this will also be seen from the prism of understanding that the more space that the transatlantic partnership, especially the European Union, the more vacuum the European Union leaves in the Western Balkans, the more maligned Russian and Chinese influence that there will be. So I think the situation is very simple. You want to fight Russia and Russian influence? Recognize Kosovo. Recognize Kosovo's independence. Allow for visa liberalization to happen. Support Kosovo's candidate status as well as Bosnia's candidate status. You want to fight Russian influence? Support North Macedonia and Albania moving forward. You want to fight Russian influence? Well, support Montenegro moving even higher than it has so far. You want to fight Russian influence? Well, you have to also fight their proxies in our region. You also have to fight their proxies in our region. If members of the European Union really want to be clear on their fight towards Russian influence and Chinese influence on their own soil, because we are European soil, they need to be honest and clear and stop the appeasement policy, the active appeasement policy that sometimes is taking place against Russian proxies. Honesty is extremely important, which is why we believe that the clear message that Chancellor Scholz has given, both in Kosovo as well as in Serbia, that Serbia must recognize Kosovo, is the way forward. Because mutual recognition, as we all know, is the only solution that can bring for long-lasting peace and stability in the region. Therefore, I will conclude with this. The EU must stand united on 3 main fronts. The first one, obviously, is Ukraine, because in response to Russia and its proxies, we need to make sure that the unity of the European Union continues to be our most important power, to show that the power in partnership is what's going to win this war. Secondly, the European Union must show that it is united in response to the aspiring democratic countries, and I note again, democratic countries, those that truly work for rule of law, democracy, and human rights, in order to allow for accelerated membership for these countries, including the Western Balkans. And finally, the EU must stand united when it comes to Kosovo. First, for the 5 non-recognizers to show that they truly are against Russian malign influence and therefore recognize Kosovo. Secondly, support visa liberalization. And finally, also support our candidate status once we apply. It may seem as nothing to some, but in the candidate status there is hope. There is hope. And there is seriousness on the way and the response that the EU sends to us. And that means if we get a candidate status, it means that the message they're sending to us is that they want us in. And what the Western Balkans needs right now most is a clear message that our seat, our place, where we belong, is in the European Union. Hopefully, in the June summit, we're going to hear encouraging messages like this, but at the same time, we need action. And let me conclude once again by reconfirming what I think is only fitting after President Zelensky's speech. We stand with the people of Ukraine. We stand with Ukraine. Because through standing with Ukraine, we're standing with the very values that are at the foundation of our country. Protection of human rights, protection of democracy, and never allowing one to bully the other just because they have the military might. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Excellency. But if I can ask you, if I can follow up with a short question, what do you think are the risks or the potential consequences of member states continuing to hesitate with regards to the Balkans?
Is this working? Yes. I think the evidence is there very clear, and the members of the European Union should simply look at it, analyze it, and see it. It is extremely clear from history that whenever the European Union and the United States of America, the transatlantic partnership that we so much rely on, have left vacuum, as I earlier said, for other forces, obviously these other malign forces have used it. We have seen it in the past decades. But the evidence that is clearer nowadays in the past few years, which is fresh, even very much fresh from the oven from Lavrov's as well as Putin's recent statements, is that their interest is to expand the conflict beyond Ukraine. It was also reconfirmed by President Zelensky today. They want to make sure that there are other conflict zones within the European continent. And Putin has been talking a lot about Kosovo, a lot about the Western Balkans. Obviously, he wants to make false narratives and false comparisons. But there is only one comparison that can be made. And that is, what is Putin doing today, Milosevic was doing a few decades ago in our region, committing war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. That's the only comparison that can be made. But another thing that Putin tells us is where he wants to target next. Obviously, through all kinds of influence, starting with propaganda machines that they are using in the Western Balkans. A lot of disinformation is happening. And then with all kinds of hybrid wars that they would want to see in our part of the region. So it is extremely important that the European Union understands that the more they delay the integration of the Western Balkans within the EU, within the Union, the more space Russia will have to increase its influence and potentially also destabilize the region. So I really do hope that this will be taken into account in the next summit as well as the next summits, because obviously we know that, and we've learned it the hard way, that these things are lasting longer than they should. They will take this into account and support all of us to move forward on a merit-based process.
Thank you so much. I would like to continue a little bit in that direction and move on to His Excellency President Milo Djukanovic. I came across a recent study, a poll that was run in Montenegro by De Facto Agency. It dates from May 2022, which shows that more than 70% of citizens in Montenegro have a positive attitude about the EU, support EU membership, and more than 80% of them would vote for EU accession in a referendum. So, in view of the discussion that we've just had, is the EU's popularity in your country and the region sustainable?
Molim prije svega da se posluže slušalicama za prevođenje oni koji ne razumiju jezik na koji ću vam se obratiti. Hvala na pozivu.
I would like to thank you for the invitation for very inspiring and ambitious topic defined like this. I will try to derive the answer to your questions from 2 or 3 theses that I was inspired by from the discussion so far. The first thesis is Russian aggression against Ukraine that actually acted as a factor of sobering in European Union. It sobered us who live in Europe, who are not yet members of the European Union, and it sobered the European Union. It is sobering, and it has acted in a sobering manner, because we have immediately become aware that this is not only aggression against Ukraine. This is aggression against the European system of values, aggression against European unity, aggression against European security. If we take it as that, this sobering can be recognized in various policies of the European Union that are being implemented since the 24th of February. This new thinking and more optimistic thinking could be heard when it comes to the enlargement policy and its destiny, when it comes to European future for the countries of the Western Balkans. And I will conclude this first thesis. I will say that there is something that we are highly interested in, and that is to see this kind of thinking and approach in Europe is not only an incident. It has to become new and better political practice of Europe, primarily European Union, whether it likes it or not, because European Union is the driving engine of the European continent, and European Union has to take the responsibility for the future and competitiveness of Europe. The second thesis, whether we want it or not, we are in the field of geopolitics. And it is clear what the official Russia wants. Official Russia wants to deprive independent and sovereign European countries and the free nations in Europe of the right to decide freely about their future. Russia wants that in order to ensure what seems to be a mission impossible. Russia wants to be back again into the position of geopolitical importance that belonged to the Soviet Union in the time of Cold War. This is the mission impossible because it is impossible to return the wheel of history. But let us keep that in mind. What is our task then? To think about the future. Geopolitically, what is the future? Well, I think that in addition to this idea of not being able to go back, the geopolitical model that was built after the Second World War has shown significant weaknesses. If it weren't so, we wouldn't be in geopolitical problems as we are today. Do we understand that this is the end? Do we understand that for the first time we seriously discuss whether the nuclear potential will be activated or not? There is a responsibility for that too. So it is clear. On the basis of this disaster in Ukraine, we see the birth of new geopolitical architecture. Nobody can say what it will look like, but it's realistic to assume that it will be polycentric. We, as Europeans, are interested in seeing where Europe will be in this new geopolitical architecture. And Europe will not be competitive if it is not stable and if it does not use all its resources. It can't be stable or use all its resources if it is not united. This is the message for Europe. The third thesis that I have today is the following. Today, in all the discussions that we have, the question is how much has the situation deteriorated after the 24th of February? And my response is, thanks to the boldness of Ukrainians and thanks to the determined response of NATO and EU, the situation has not deteriorated dramatically. But we have to notice that the Western Balkans is devastated in terms of values, not after the 24th of February, but it was devastated through hybrid warfare activities of Russia in the last 6 years. I have been warning the officials in NATO and in European Union of this constantly, and I think I have the right to do so because we went through the attempt of Russia to hinder our wish to become members of NATO in 2016. We went through that experience. And do I need to explain it all? I mean, what they did in Montenegro in 2016 and what they are doing now in Ukraine comes from the same political portfolio. It's just that they are more brutal now and they use different means because Ukraine is in vicinity. So I think that when it comes to values, Western Balkans is devastated and it hesitates seriously when it comes to the validity of its direction and strategic course. Instead of clearly recognizing that European Union and NATO, but European Union above all, have primary responsibility for European future of every European region, we have European Union having second thoughts. First, they had a fatigue, and then they were thinking about whether to deepen European Union first and then to enlarge it. In the meantime, Putin did not have any second thoughts. He was working. He ruined the European system of values in the Western Balkans. And I will conclude. The war in Ukraine will end. May that be sooner and not later. But I claim that it will take us years to eliminate the damaging consequences of the Russian hybrid warfare and destruction in the Western Balkans. It is very important to be aware of that. The fourth message that I have, the fourth thesis, is directly related to your question. To what extent is the European perspective realistic and sustainable in Montenegro? So when it comes to support to Montenegro, we have to go a bit beyond. We have to take into account the regional context. Recently, together with Prime Minister Kovacevski, I was in a dinner with High Representative Mr. Borrell and leaders from the Western Balkans. And I still can hear that Prime Minister Kovacevski said that the decrease of support in Northern Macedonia to European future is so concerning that it has become questionable whether anyone can win the elections having and advocating that policy. And the president of Serbia at that time said that the support to European prospects of Serbia is also dramatically decreasing. I think that I remember well that 34% of citizens of Serbia support European future for Serbia and 45% were against. So this has not come out of the blue. This is a consequence of the destruction that is on the scene and also a consequence of the fact that we don't have so much European Union in the Western Balkans. And what do we have now? Now we have the explanation from some countries in the Western Balkans that they have a problem with their public opinion because 80% of their public opinion supports Russia and even Russian aggression. Well, this is not the worst thing, trust me. The worst thing is that today, in important positions in the international community, you find understanding for such an attitude, which really disturbs me, which shows me that this optimism that I talked about in the future, when I talked about European Union policy and reaction to Ukraine, it discourages me that this is going to become rule. So there are two conditions. European Union has to say whether it remains the community of values or not. It is impossible to have understanding for somebody who declares that he is for European values, but is neutral towards somebody who destroys European values through aggression. They are trying to present this as diplomatic skill. It's not a diplomatic skill. It's not politics. It's the matter of moral. It is a moral decline if you are in a dilemma now which side to take. That is the problem. We have to hear from Europe clearly that they will open the door to those who are aligning with European values without any questions. And the second thing, we in the Western Balkans have to do our homework. That's, of course, a fact. The slowing down of the enlargement policy led to the slowing down of reforms in the Western Balkans. That's true. And we do not seek for any shortcut. I think it would be wrong. I think that we need to meet all the requirements and then join European Union. And I want to say to you that Montenegro is absolutely ready and willing for that. And we would think that any other way would be a bad suggestion, a bad proposal. And I will conclude by saying that I strongly support geopolitical call for candidacy status for Ukraine, Georgia, and Moldova, and Bosnia and Herzegovina, because it is a geopolitical gesture. It is not shortcut. We got that right in 2008. So after that, we will have serious activities on the reforms, which would mean meeting the standards. And the second thing, I think that without any hesitation, we should open negotiations. They should open the negotiations with Northern Macedonia and Albania. I think that it is where European Union is facing a temptation. It's not a good response that due to the lack of functionality within European Union, they will stop the enlargement procedure. I mean, it will not solve the problem. European Union has to deal with its lack of functionality. It has to open the issue of whether they will allow on the basis of bilateral problems, historic bilateral and identity problems as it comes in case of Bulgaria and Macedonia, they can actually cancel one of the basic policies of the European Union and cancel the vision of European Union. European Union has to solve this independent from the enlargement policy. And I think that the enlargement policy should continue and, without any hesitation, immediately give visa liberalization for Kosovo. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency. Fascinating discussion. It cannot longer be business as usual. As we've heard at the beginning, there are serious questions to be posed about the future, whether the EU, as we've heard from President Zelensky, can still be free, safe in the future. And of course now about the importance of deciding on what that future is. Really very interesting remarks, and we will continue this conversation, but I'm afraid that at this point we have to make room for the next speakers. So I would like everyone in the room to stay seated while we take a family picture with our panelists, and then while they leave for the new speakers to come up. And while the photographer is getting ready for the family picture, please join me in thanking warmly our distinguished speakers for their very interesting contributions. another star-studded panel. Very grateful to be able to welcome all of you. I would like to start, excuse me, can we start? Thank you so much. I would like to start first with His Excellency President Talat Jaferi. Given that you were the first speaker of an assembly in the Balkan region that has traveled to Ukraine, would you care to share your impressions with us and also to tell us your reading about the ongoing war?
Faleminderit për mundësinë që në forumin e dytë të radhës.
Thank you for inviting me to this forum to be one of the speakers as President of the Assembly of the Republic of North Macedonia. I would like to greet all the participants on my personal behalf and on behalf of the MPs. Naturally, as a former military person who experienced physically and practically the dissolution of the former Yugoslavia, it is practically, I saw the horrors of the war in Kosovo, and unfortunately in 2001 here, it is also an indicator that we give us all that we should all draw conclusions, and in the invitation to my counterpart to visit, it was needed to directly inform myself about what our assembly previously adopted a declaration for support of Ukraine, the Ukrainian people, the state and the government, and for condemning the Russian Federation, the Russian aggression on Ukraine, because of the fact that all of us who are decision makers, we need to be directly informed about the consequences of the war in Ukraine, about the fact that it is the direct non-recognition of the armed conflict resulted in the Western Balkans to end the wars without condemnation of those who started the wars. And I expressed unreserved support of the Ukrainian institutions and the Ukrainian people, defining the consequences that we had the opportunity to see for ourselves, because it was nothing if it is a classical genocide that is happening in front of the eyes before the eyes of Europe and the world in general. The similarities and the historical context of the similarities after the Second World War ended with 3 agreements, international treaties, including Yalta, Tehran and Potsdam, which made a pocket with the former Yugoslavia as a neutral zone, which needed to be the borderline between the East and the West. The war in Ukraine is similar to that historical tendency by Russia's refusal to delete the border between Russia and the in the European Union, and the tendency to make Ukraine as a pocket. We as a state, which since 1991 until now, since the dissolution of Yugoslavia and the disarmament of Yugoslavia, our parliament adopted a resolution for defining our strategic goals for accession to the EU and to NATO, and we worked on these goals and the tendencies to fulfill them. That is why the Assembly and the government and the citizens, with the support of over 80%, agreed to change the name of the country so that we can attain one of the conditions to be members of the NATO, even though the other conditions were already met. Our journey to the European Union started in 2004 with the application and the questionnaire, and with the granting of the candidate status, and the accession to NATO was a similar marathon, a race to meet the conditions, which in all reports since 2006 until now, North Macedonia said that North Macedonia fulfilled all conditions to start negotiations. Unfortunately, because of the bilateral and historical reasons, we cannot change history. It is a factography, and it cannot be changed. That is why I believe that we all, especially the European Union, needs to answer the question, where is Europe going today? So, quo vadis Europe? Because of the fact that we should not let bilateral issues to be a precondition and an obstacle for opening the negotiations and for fulfilling the European future of those countries. That is why at the heart of Europe, in Germany and France, 5 years after the World War II, they tried to make a Europe of peace and of stability, and I believe that it is time to repeat that in 2022 at the next conference of the European Union in June 2022. Thank you for the opportunity, and if you have any questions, I am at your disposal to answer them.
Thank you. Thank you very much for these very interesting reflections. I will turn now to His Excellency Minister Ivan Korchok. The EU has been more decisive, more united and faster in its reactions to Russia than in any previous crisis. Yet differences has also begun to surface, and differences among member states in how to deal with this new era, let's say. So how important is it, in your opinion, for the EU to deal with the Balkans and in the current context? And also at the time when the EU and the member states themselves are facing all sorts of challenges.
So I'll be speaking here from this place. First, let me start by thanking our host here and congratulating you on outstanding and perfectly organized forum. Keep on doing that, because it is important to attract attention of all those who are dealing with the Western Balkans, with European politics. It's a very, very good opportunity, and once again, congratulations on that. Before I respond, and I promise I will respond to your question very directly, let me elaborate a bit on what I cannot skip and ignore, what I've heard in the previous amazing panel, I want to say. We saw leaders from the Western Balkans, and first, it's a word of gratitude from a member state of the European Union, because it's so encouraging to hear leaders of the Western Balkans speak so highly about European Union, about their passionate commitment to their European future. Sometimes in the European Union, not sometimes, but very often, we're desperate when it comes to the challenges we are dealing with, differences and disputes and everything. And here I come to Ohrid. Yesterday I was in Podgorica. I had a long discussion with President Đukanović and other leaders, and I hear such a convinced and determined plea in favor of you becoming part of this family. I want to thank you for this. Second remark and reflection on what I've heard in the previous panel would be a bit controversial, but it comes out of my heart, my political conviction. When I hear the debate about granting the candidate status for Ukraine or not, what consequences that would mean, whether there would be disillusion here in the Western Balkans or not, we have to be very careful, dear friends. Very careful, because my impression is that it may turn into kind of horse race. We must not lose the sight of the context in which the debate about granting candidate status for Ukraine has come up. Why are we discussing this? Had there not been the 24th of February this year, there would not be discussion about that. And dear friends, you know where Slovakia stands when it comes to the future of the Western Balkans. We want you all in, immediately, including Kosovo. I want to say, for the record here, and very publicly, there is a road to it, of course. But President Zelensky, we should not forget, he is in a situation of a leader who is kneeling in front of us because candidate status, he needs it as a kind of moral boost for his citizens, for women, for men in uniform, for all those who are running into the shelter in order to protect them from the bombs, for those who are collecting dead bodies on the streets of Bucha and Irpin and everywhere. So this is completely different context under which we are discussing whether to grant the candidate status or not. I find it a bit strange to debate, which seems as if granting candidate status now to Ukraine would be less hope and less perspective for the Western Balkan countries. That's not the case, and we should be very careful in not dragging us into that debate, which once again resembles me of, using momentum for kind of horse race. And thirdly, the question was about unity, about how we stand about that in European Union. Of course, in face of this Russian aggression, it's going to be very costly for us. But you are right when you're saying that it was unprecedented, fast and determined and bold reaction that the European Union was able to agree on with the 6 packages of sanctions. And right, I'm not ignoring the fact that it was difficult to hammer the deal with the 6th package. But there is no other alternative but to stay united. But it's no other alternative to be ready to pay the cost of that unity on our side. Otherwise, and I'll conclude with that, a country like Slovakia, which is a frontline state, it's not only difficult to sustain the cost that we are paying with the sanctions, but it's equally difficult to sell it to my own people in Slovakia. But the alternative is Slovakia will get a new neighbor. And the neighbor will not be Ukraine. The neighbor will be undemocratic country which started this aggression. So therefore, there is no alternative but unity, determination, and readiness once again to suffer a little bit, because every day when we wake up, we have to see Zelensky, we have to see the proud Ukrainian nation. What sacrifice are they bringing up? And therefore, once again, we should not lose the sight of the context under which we are discussing this alternative of granting the candidate status for Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. And of course, you are right that the circumstances are special, even though I'm sure that many in the Balkans will also maybe remind you that the region too has seen war. But even if we can make the argument that an accelerated membership is important now for Ukraine and for the Eastern countries, do you think that the current enlargement process can accommodate such an accelerated process? And if we bend the rules in a sense, or if we alter the existing process for the Eastern countries, should we also do so? Should we use this moment to do so also for the Balkans?
You mean to alter the process, or?
Well, I mean, Ukraine. If it is Ukraine and Moldova, if they are to receive candidate status, they will effectively be skipping certain steps.
No. That's why I wanted to clarify the question. Look, this is again something by which we are trying to derail the whole discussion. Everybody in Ukraine, including President Zelensky, knows that there will be no shortcuts for Ukraine. I want to say very clearly, they're not naive to believe that tomorrow they're starting negotiations. Not at all. And I wish I could sound nicer or better in saying that Ukraine and the aggression against that country will accelerate the process of integration of the Western Balkan countries. I don't think so, because what we need in European Union, we need well-prepared members. But having said that, we too need European Union, which is credible when it comes to our promise to allow you to get closer once you have delivered on the benchmarks. And therefore, I am the one who says that, the case with North Macedonia is long overdue, and it's to the detriment of the credibility of the entire enlargement process. But that does not mean that we should entirely alter the conditions, because once again, it serves the interests of these countries that they're joining European Union well prepared. Then the benefits for your citizens will be as you wish to have it.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification, Minister. And yet, and I come now to His Excellency Minister Alexander Schallenberg, there are various proposals that are currently circulating and that propose reforms to the enlargement process. And they're competing for attention more recently. What do you make of such ideas? How necessary is it to rethink our approach more generally to enlargement, be it towards the Eastern countries or the Balkans?
Yeah, no, first of all, thank you for the invitation, thank you for having me again. It's good to be back. I enjoyed Ohrid last year, and I'm already enjoying it now. It's always good to be together. I believe, and I have to react a little to the general debate, yes, there are proposals on the table, and yes, Ukraine is in a particular situation. Ukraine is at war. Ukraine is the victim of an aggression. But our position for the European Council is very clear from Austria. We say yes, we agree to give Moldova and Ukraine the candidate status, but we say, but don't forget about another region. We are masters of wishful thinking in Europe. We were thinking and believing that Russia might not attack. We are fabricating the world the way we like it, and we shouldn't be naive and not only focus on one possible or one existing area of confrontation. Russia has the potential to be a spoiler as well. And as we have heard beforehand, there is no vacuum. I believe we have a geopolitical responsibility as European Union, not only towards the East, but also to the Southeast. And history has proven again and again, there is no lasting security and stability in Central Europe if there's not lasting security and stability in the East and in the Southeast of our continent. And from my perspective, the situation as far as we see here in the Western Balkans is enlargement is not delivering. we are running the risk of losing the people in the Balkans. Mood is shifting. And I've been dealing with this issue for the last 15 years as diplomat and as minister. And for the first time we have surveys where the negative mood towards Europe is prevailing, is bigger than the positive one. And this should be a wake-up call. This should, there should be an alarm bell going off within the European Union. Because it would potentially opens the door even further for Russia or other powers to be spoilers here. And that's why I believe it's important to rethink not the enlargement process as such, because we have reformed it, but how can we create a situation where people, the citizens, realize that this is actually delivering. This 0 and 1 thinking doesn't work, because you start as a candidate country, and then what? Nothing happens. Bureaucrats meet in Brussels, you open clusters, you open chapters, and nothing is delivered on the ground. And I believe what our suggestion was with the gradual integration is, I believe we have to leave the templates we had in the past, saying you're either full member or you have a free trade agreement or association agreement, and there is the European Economic Area. We have already now different systems. Look at Switzerland, look at the UK, look at the opt-outs we had for Denmark. So why not give the countries who have the perspective of becoming members of the European Union, if they have applied already their key, adapted to their key communautaire in a certain area, to treat them politically in this area of the common market as if they were full member states. I could even envisage to have meetings in the Council where we say from 10 to 12 we discuss among 29 or 30 states, and then afterwards we decide 27, because this is, we still have the treaties, but we can go far beyond what we're doing now. And I have a very simple example. How is it possible that in a region which is surrounded by EU member states, which is not the backyard, but the center court of Europe, which is the patio of the European Union, how can it be that Chinese are building highways leading from nowhere to nowhere, leading these countries to, certain countries to be indebted, and at the end of the day, these highways should actually link two EU member states with each other. So they should be members of the Trans-European Network Policy. They should be part of Horizon Europe. They should be part of our energy policy. So, and this is creating, not only for the citizens in these countries, this situation where they feel that something is going on, but making it also very clear to anybody else, these countries are part of our European family. They belong to us, and they will be one day full members.
Thank you. What I'm wondering, though, is how are your proposals, or how is this proposal different from what is in the new methodology that was recently adopted based on French proposals, and which also was foreseeing incentives peppered around the way as countries make progress? So, is it the case that we don't have the tools and we really have to rethink of how we engage with these countries, or merely that we haven't even tested properly the tools that we already have in the toolkit?
I believe it goes beyond. It definitely goes beyond, because what we say is include them in the decision shaping in Brussels. Make them part of it. Because I believe it would also make a difference here, because suddenly you have to send 10 transport experts from the ministry in charge to Brussels, who sit actually in the working groups, who see what is the spirit, what is it like to sit together every week and struggle sometimes. And this is a learning process that it also has, I believe, a big impact here, and it would be added, obviously, to access to funds. I believe, simply put, the European carrot is not big enough. That's why we are risking of losing this region, because talking in theory about chapters, about clusters, and the people on the ground don't feel anything. The task ahead is very clear for me. And I mean, we have the visa liberalization for Kosovo. I mean, it's more than overdue. It's ridiculous that we haven't given it yet. And this is one of the few things where people feel that something is going on, but afterwards, not do anything for the next 10 years for the people in Kosovo and wait until they're fully members is not sufficient. We have to do something between.
But if press both you and Minister Korczok a bit further. Yes. To what extent would an invitation to participate as observer in some of the high-level meetings in Brussels, to what extent would this deal with the sensitive issues that we've heard during the first panel, the resolution of the dispute between Serbia and Kosovo regarding the status of the former, or with the problems that we're still facing in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And you know, I think one of you, if I'm not wrong, mentioned also visa liberalization for Kosovo, with all of the other pending important issues in this dossier. Would this solve anything really when it comes to the nitty-gritty and the transformative power of the enlargement policy?
I think it would definitely help increase kind of ownership of the agenda. And I will not elaborate more because I've been given such a generous space to speak, but one remark. While my dear friend Alexander Schallenberg spoke about the ways how to get it closer, how to get it participate, and referring maybe to European political community, I think there is a lesson to be learned when somebody from the EU comes up with that idea. We have to communicate in advance and very clearly what it is, because if you listen now to all those who are debating that, there is concern. You cannot ignore the concern that we are hearing from the Western Balkan countries asking logical questions. What is it? The opening of accession talks with North Macedonia, long overdue, delayed, and then something is put on the table. We don't know what it is. I think there are many, many good elements in it. How to get you closer, how to increase partnership. Alexander referred to, you know, experts who can be here on the ground, helping you, getting closer in the respective areas. But we must not create confusion from the very outset, because it's then to the detriment of, for example, excellent idea how to get you closer. And we have to make clear from the very beginning, this is not an alternative. So I think communication from our side, that's the piece of lesson that I think we should learn. And
Indeed, I'm agreeing as well. Much uncertainty also around what the political community idea is all about, what the geopolitical community idea is about, and so on and so forth. Well, okay, then let's open up a little bit the discussion. We have heard from President Zelensky at the beginning that Russia challenged all of us, he said. So I turn to His Excellency Minister Zbigniew Rau, I hope I'm pronouncing correctly your name, to ask, how does the war, in your opinion, affect European security architecture?
Well, let me begin with the most traditional way by thanking the hosts for inviting me to this forum already for the second time, and for the opportunity to present the position that is, of course, my own, even my personal one, but also I do believe represents the position of the overwhelming majority of the Polish people. So let me refer, first of all, to answer your question, perhaps indirectly, to the question put to this panel. What after the war in Ukraine? And I'm convinced that the best way to answer this question is to divide the answer into three parts. What after the war should happen to Ukraine itself, then to Russia, and then to the transatlantic community? Well, my answer is that after the war, Ukraine should be victorious, which means that Ukraine should restore its national independence, state sovereignty, territorial integrity. Ukraine should rebuild itself. It should rebuild its economic potential, its social coherence, and its democratic system, while improving its, of course, on the way to this goal. What about Russia after the war? Russia, I'm convinced that I must say it, Russia should give up its imperial mode of thinking and acting. It should give up the tradition, which is extremely important, I regret to say that, important element of its identity. Russia should democratize itself, referring to its best tradition of the decabrists in the 19th century and Andrei Sakharov in the 20th century. And Russia should consider all its neighbors as equal partners that enjoy the right to their sovereignty and national independence the same way Russia enjoys its right to the same values. And the West, the transatlantic community, after the war, should be united in the defense of the common values. The values, principles, and commitments for which the Ukrainians are paying the highest price these days, and which are so dear to the societies of Western Balkans that make them to undertake very profound, very deep reforms in order to live up to the standards indicated by the European Union. So, transatlantic community should include the Western Balkan countries as well as Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia. Now, ladies and gentlemen, there is no doubt in my mind that you are looking at me in dismay, because a politician of my age, who is these days presenting this kind of picture, has every right to be accused of unprecedented, naive, wishful thinking. But I allow myself to disagree with you, because in order to make this vision come true, it's enough to meet three conditions. First of all, as far as Ukraine is concerned, it's enough to answer its requests and deliver everything that they need to win the war. To win the war in the just cause that everyone in this hall is considered just, and I believe is considered ours too. So it's a matter, as you know very well, of heavy weapons and the determination in delivering it. And the other issue, the other condition, as far as Ukraine is concerned, is to respect the Ukrainian right to decide on itself when they want to start the negotiations and what time, under what conditions. Because this is their right for which they are, as I said, we are paying the highest price. Okay. What about Russia? No. I still have a couple of points. Sorry.
Yeah, we need to move on though. So.
No, let me just 5 sentences. Please. Then, how to persuade Russia to become non-imperial and democratic? Well, not by persuasion. Sanctions have to be applied, imposed, to the very end, to the very breakthrough, mental breakthrough of Russian leaders and of Russian society. And what about the West? What about the transatlantic community? In order to make this condition true, one thing is absolutely necessary. Transatlantic community. Each country that belongs to it, each of us, has to put the priority to the values and commitments, to the very idea that, for example, international law has to prevail, that democratic values, human rights, human dignity have to prevail and have to be defended and protected. And this priority to this kind of mode to this kind of thinking and acting has been given, and not to national interests, to the interests of this or that industrial lobby, this or that circles that prefer to advance their own narrow-minded, egoistic interests over the values on which our community has been built. What's the alternative to the meeting of these 3 conditions? Chaos, war, violations of every kind of rights on a mass scale, and perhaps a nuclear war. So the choice is more than very, very simple. Thank you.
And your message is loud and clear. Thank you very much, Minister Rao. Of course, it's all very nice and also very important to think of what comes next after the war. But in a sense, it's also a little bit premature because we're still facing the war. The war is still ongoing. The situation is still critical. So in the meantime, I come to you, Your Excellency, Mrs. Rosemary DiCarlo, to ask, is it high time that we reevaluate some old assumptions and approaches to our international world order?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Karina, and thank you to the government of North Macedonia for inviting me to the Prespa Forum. The last time I was in North Macedonia was for the signing of the Prespa Agreement, so I'm very pleased to be back again today. I mean, as previous speakers have said, these are really challenging times for peace and security, not only in Europe, but in the world. I'd like to start out by being clear about what the UN position is about the war in Ukraine. Secretary General Antonio Guterres has stated very clearly, and the UN General Assembly has declared in 2 resolutions that Russia's invasion of Ukraine is a violation of Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity and a violation of the UN Charter. Obviously, Russia's actions have undermined the foundations of the European security architecture. It's also shaken the foundations of international peace and security. Now, this is not the first time that the UN has faced a challenge of this kind. This is a greater magnitude, perhaps, but it's coming at a time when there are already deep divisions and growing divisions and fragmentation in the multilateral system. Now, we've been seeing these growing divisions for some time now. It's why last fall, Secretary General Guterres issued a report calling for greater international solidarity. The name of the report was Our Common Agenda. He asked for recommitment to international norms and principles in the rule of law. He also called for a new agenda for peace. Now, you ask about a new international order. The international order that we have been operating within over the last 77 years is the UN Charter. And what does it stand for? It stands for sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity of states. It stands for equality of states. It also stands for non-use of force to resolve disputes, and of course, respect for human rights. I don't think there's anyone in this room that disagrees with those principles. They've served us well, they've prevented a world war, and we believe that member states should firmly recommit to those principles. Now, how are we going to do this? It's easy to say recommit, but we do need some serious discussions among the international community, among members of the United Nations in particular. We need to look at the underlying drivers of conflict, what we might be able to do about them. We need a renewed effort to agree on the effective collective security responses. And obviously, we need meaningful steps to deal with and manage emerging threats. If we look at the impact of the war in Ukraine, not just on Ukraine, but on Europe and the entire world, particularly the developing world, we have an ongoing food crisis. We have a potential crisis in energy, in the financial sector. There's a need for action. We need greater solidarity. We need greater dialogue among the international community. And we need action, and we need action now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Of course, there is little disagreement perhaps about the principles, but do we have the right ways to go about achieving, implementing, realizing those principles? For example, is it possible for the EU and the United States and the Western world to reconcile the goals of achieving justice with the goal of democracy promotion when it comes to reacting to Russia?
I think justice and democracy promotion go hand in hand. And I do think that there is a way to make very clear what the principles are that, whether it be the European Union, the United States, or the UN is proposing, and that is one of democratic governance and very strong for respect for human rights, as well as accountability as well. There should be no impunity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, as we are quickly approaching the end of our time together, I would now like to invite back on stage Minister Bujar Osmani to join me. And I will ask him an impossible task, which is to give us his main takeaways from this very rich discussion that we've had over the past 2 hours. So, sir, what are your key conclusions that we can wrap this panel with?
Thank you so much. First of all, let me thank you for your participation on the second Prespa Forum for Dialogue, to congratulate you for these frank and productive discussions. I will be very short with my concluding remarks, but since I approved the agenda, so I put my name all over the forum, including this one. But we had here with us 4 esteemed presidents, 2 of them, Mr. Borut Pahor and Mr. Zoran Milanovic, president of 2 EU member states, from whom we have heard sobering calls for the urgent start of the Western Balkans accession process as the most appropriate geopolitical response to peace and stability in Europe. We also had presidents from the region, Mrs. Vjosa Osmani-Sadriou and Mr. Milo Djukanovic, who have asked for a steadfast commitment from the European Union for the fulfillment of a credible enlargement policy due to the disrupted security architecture. And I am delighted that my dear colleagues, Ministers Korczok, Schallenberg, certainly Zbigniew Rau, were so straightforward in their interventions regarding the implications of the war in Ukraine for the region of Western Balkans. And yes, if we want a solid security architecture, we must address today's and tomorrow's challenges within international organizations where UN stands as a backbone of the multilateral system. And I thank you, Mrs. Di Carlo, for your attendance here with us today and for your wise words. Ladies and gentlemen, let me shortly point out the obvious. We were not supposed to witness a war in Europe ever again. Yet what it seemed to be unimaginable and only part of the books, just a while ago turns in the worst of nightmares of our time. An unprovoked, unjustified, and brutal aggression against sovereign state in blatant violation of the Charter of the United Nations, the Helsinki Final Act, the basic premises of international law, and I would say the human decency as well. In front of this unprecedented challenge, our response was strong and determined. The free world reacted the only way possible, condemning Russia and imposing large scope of sanctions for its unacceptable behavior, while standing resolutely behind Ukraine and its brave people, aware that their fight for freedom and dignity is also a defense of the values and principles we cherish and hold dear. But we cannot talk about the cure unless we think profoundly about the reasons that brought us where we stand now. We missed so many opportunities to consolidate the space of democracy, stability, and security in Europe. We might have thought that the processes that followed the fall of the Berlin Wall were irreversible, and that the respect of the right of peoples to determine their own destiny would be never questioned. The lack of strategic vision and political courage that prevented the completion of Europe, what we on the Western Balkans feels the most, combined with the wishful thinking about the unquestionable dominance of freedom and democracy, created the fertile ground for return of imperialistic, unilateral, and revisionist tendencies in Europe. The ghosts of history took over the multilateral scene, dominating global agendas and paralyzing the work of the international organizations. The aggression of Russia against Ukraine might be only Putin's war, one of these tragic incidents that tries in vain, but with immense devastations, to reverse the course of history. Nevertheless, the consequences would be tragic and enduring. Our future political action should be based on the lesson learned. Firstly, we must reconcile the commitment to our values with the always existent reality of geopolitics. The European project, primarily conceived as a unique instrument of peace, must come to its completion by including the all Western Balkan countries in foreseeable future. We simply cannot scarify another generation and risk possible destabilizations, waiting for the acceleration of unbelievably slow process of EU enlargement, additionally aggravated by inability of certain member states to overcome the prejudices of the past and focus on the larger picture. Last year, at the first Prespa Forum for Dialogue, we rightly praised the achievements of diplomacy in resolving difficult and seemingly irresolvable disputes. The war against Ukraine is a huge setback with high price for us all, and for the Ukrainian people at the first place. But let not despair. We need to reinforce the efforts and project a more visionary light for the European construction. We need determination and tenacity in facing the threats to peace and security. We must strengthen the international organizations and give more sense to effective multilateralism, preventive diplomacy, and mediation. Only with human wisdom and dignity, political will and determined stewardship, we can successfully navigate and bring the boat we are all in together to the safe haven for our and for the next generations. With this, I am happy to wrap up the official opening of the second Prespa Forum Dialogue, and I invite President Pendarovsky to give this year's Prespa Forum Dialogue Courage Award. I thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to ask you to use your equipment for translation, because I would like, at the end of the day, to say a few words in my mother tongue, in Macedonian. Минатата година на првиот Преспа форум
First Prespa Forum Dialogue, we presented an award to Mr. Netu Nimitz in honor of his many decades of efforts contributing to reaching the Prespa Agreement. And these days we are celebrating the 4th anniversary of the Prespa Agreement, which can serve as an example of resolving these differences with diplomatic means and not by force. These days, when we were thinking who do we present an award to, unfortunately and regretfully, due to a war that happened unexpectedly, the Russian aggression against Ukraine, brought to the forefront the brave Ukrainian people who defend their country and defend their freedom. What we could have witnessed and what we have been witnessing in the past 4 years go beyond all the stories we have heard about our ancestors fighting for their freedom and rights. So this year, everybody in the organizational committee unanimously decided that the award for preserving democracy and for fighting for human rights and freedoms, we decided to present this award to the Ukrainian people. I invite the ambassador of Ukraine to receive the award.
Dear President, dear Prime Ministers, dear friends, I would like to sincerely thank you for this prestigious award for the Ukrainian people. We, Ukrainians, are brave and courageous nation. For us, freedom is the highest value. In this brutal war, we defend ourselves, our country, our future, but also we defend the European democratic values. Only together, we, the democratic countries, can successfully defeat the Russian autocracy. Thank you for your support. Together, we will definitely win. Thank you.
Thank you so much as well. We had an opening session full of very interesting insights and full of emotion, and I hope that it sets the right tone for tomorrow's discussions as well. We will now proceed with a family photo also for this part of the panel, and then I will kindly invite all our speakers for a photo together outside. And before that, while the photos are being prepared, I would like to kindly ask you to join me for a final and very warm round of applause also for these new speakers that we've had for the second part. And I would also personally like to thank you for staying with us, being present here today, and you will be able to enjoy a reception that follows this session. So let's give a big round of applause. And I hope you enjoy tomorrow's proceedings as well. Thank you. Please stay on the stage for the photo, yeah? And then join us outside.
Thank you.